All right, this is Todd Neef back again, eponymously this time on my own website, toddneef.com, I4E. Relaunching my podcast, this time under my own name rather than under the South Loop Strength and Conditioning umbrella of fitness related activities, articles, etc. And I'm back interviewing my friend Jason Phillips. I've known Jason for a long time now. We get into that a little bit in the interview. But he is a nutrition coach. He's coached several of my clients in nutrition while I've written their exercise programming for them. So Jason and I have communicated back and forth on that a bunch. And I've also attended some of his certifications. Most recently, went to his Driven Life Nutrition certification in Chicago, the first one, which is exciting. Jason can be found at jasonphillipsnutrition.com. He's on Instagram at jasonphillipsfitness. And Jason is a nutrition coach. He has a supplement company called Mission 6. He has a forthcoming book, which you get into in the interview. But he has coached CrossFit Games athletes. He's coached UFC fighters. He's coached WWE wrestlers, all the kind of social proof that people are looking for. But on the back end, Jason has a pretty deep knowledge of the ins and outs of nutrition and how people respond to different prescriptions and why certain prescriptions are appropriate for some individuals, not for others, why some people should do keto, why some people shouldn't do keto, all that kind of stuff that makes all the headline grabbing listicles these days. But most importantly, in this interview, we dig into a lot of the coaching nitty gritty in terms of creating buy-in with clients, understanding the hormonal implications of things like overtraining and undereating, which anyone in the CrossFit space sees a lot of with all you overly ambitious, excitable, push hard people. We also discussed Jason's business, which has grown to a pretty impressive level, not just with his coaching business, with his certification and his supplement stuff as well. So one of the challenges that any coach runs into is figuring out how to replace themselves in terms of doing all of the day-to-day coaching once that demand sort of outstrips their capacity to meet it, but without letting the quality drop off. So Jason has an interesting insight into how to work through that problem, then also how to go from zero to hundreds of clients, and then how to not just hustle aimlessly and stay up late and get up early and beat yourself into the ground responding to emails and running around all day, but how to actually focus and prioritize and have some sort of structure to moving forward. Also, and I hate when people do this, so apologies in advance for my own poor behavior here, but something went a little funky with the audio on this recording. I was able to filter out most of the noise, but the way the Skype call was recorded is a little iffy, so apologies in advance for any audio files listening. So with that, let's get into it. Hey guys, this is Todd from South Loop Strength and Conditioning and Legion Strength and Conditioning. I'm here today with Jason Phillips, relaunching this podcast under my own personal name, which is very exciting because I'm a huge egomaniac and want everyone to constantly be saying my own name. And I'm pretty excited to be here with Jason. I've known Jason for a pretty long time. I think we first met at a grid event, Jason, back in, where was that? Was that in Miami or outside of it?
It was either Vegas or Miami. Vegas was the combine that year. Miami was the draft. And that whole period of time was a huge blur. But yes, it was around that time.
Yeah, I actually, I think, man, I don't remember which event it was at, but I met you briefly and didn't, just like, hey, this is Jason. I was like, cool, man. I'm Todd. See ya. And then, and then just kept seeing you pop up more and more, coaching people on nutrition, saying some pretty smart stuff about making sure people are eating enough food, particularly in the sport of CrossFit. And, came to some of your seminars and you coached some of my clients in nutrition. So we've known each other for a while, and it's just kind of been like, you're sort of on my peripheral vision, and then we sort of communicated more and more based upon all that stuff. So I'm happy to have a formal opportunity to ask you a bunch of questions that would probably be awkward to ask in like a normal conversation.
Well, dude, first of all, thank you for having me on. Second, super excited you're restarting this because your knowledge needs to be out to a lot of people. And third, you can always ask me anything you want, anytime, because I have that much respect for you. So, I think I'm equally as excited to be coming on as I am for the future editions of this podcast, because I think that, again, like, your knowledge is something that needs to be shared. We were talking off air about how I actually want to help you get that knowledge to more people. But I'm super humbled to be one of the first guests back, and excited about what we're about to send out to people.
There we go. It's gonna be a great series of questions and answers. So
Do it.
You've been on a bunch of podcasts and all that kind of stuff. So some people probably know who you are, at least within the sort of fitness and CrossFit industry, based upon some of the names who you've worked with. You coach Brent Fikowski. You own a supplement company called Mission 6, which sponsors some pretty high level athletes and makes delicious protein and carbohydrate powders. But I think that one of the things that's really interesting about your story is you coming into the CrossFit and sort of mixed modal functional fitness space with a lot of background knowledge about nutrition and supplements and everything like that from other industries. Can you kind of give us a rundown of sort of how you came into CrossFit and what your background is?
Yeah, it's funny. I was actually talking to John Russell this morning. I'm sure you're familiar with him, and we were talking about that exact subject. And, one of the things he mentioned was like, man, it's really cool that you get to work with CrossFitters because obviously, like, they have the need for system regeneration and fueling energy systems. And I was like, wow, it's really cool to hear another person say that and actually understand that. Because when I came into the CrossFit world, all I was seeing was paleo, zone. And then, like, I started seeing macros, which I was like, well, great, that's the next trend. But I was seeing it applied from a cosmetic standpoint. I was never seeing it applied from a performance standpoint. And as you know, like a cosmetic standpoint usually involves some level of body fat loss. I mean, there's like a very small fraction of clients that come to us whose cosmetic goals are, hey man, I'm super shredded, but I just want to get some more muscle, where you would, potentially be adding some body fat or gaining size, right? And that would require a surplus. But somebody wants to lose body fat, you have to put them in a deficit. Being in a calorie deficit for a very demanding sport with a lot of training volume and intensity is a recipe for disaster. And so I knew firsthand from trying to make it as a CrossFit athlete, let me say that very, very loosely because I'm fucking terrible. But I knew firsthand what the rigors were, and I also knew firsthand what it was like to not eat enough. So anybody that knows my story knows I started with an eating disorder. I also talk openly that I don't believe eating disordered individuals ever completely overcome it, because it is a nervous system disorder. It is how your brain's wired. I don't think you can rewire your brain. I think that you can shift the focus and you can rechannel some of those things. But I think that it's always there a little bit. So when I was doing high level CrossFit, I did still have cosmetic considerations, and I knew firsthand what it felt like just to be beaten down, to feel like crap. And really like the beginnings of my kind of research, into adrenal fatigue and my applications around adrenal fatigue, which I now refer to as HPA dysfunction. And so that's really what got me into it. And I just started seeing so many high level athletes experiencing what I was, only they were a lot more resilient and they were a lot better at the sport. So they were going to regionals, going to the games, just not performing, adequately.
Sure. So, I think that one of the things that's interesting when you talk about people beating themselves down with training is that a lot of people who are, in the space, or coaches or nutrition coaches who are sort of, explaining this is a problem and this has happened to people and that they need to watch out for it, are almost entirely people who have firsthand experience with overtraining themselves or beating themselves into the ground, or, like you mentioned, getting some sort of HPA axis dysfunction. Can you sort of talk us through what your firsthand experience with that was?
Yeah, so, I mean, when that happened to me, I had actually hired a coach, because I actually said this in my certification, and I fully believe it, but, as somebody that is a coach for a living, I generally believe that if I'm not hiring coaches for every aspect of my life, I'm a giant hypocrite, because if you're a coach, you generally believe in the art of coaching, you should have coaches in your life. So now, I have coaches that handle my programming. I have a coach that works for me that also handles my nutrition. I have several business coaches. I have a life coach. I have lots of different mentors. So I had hired a coach in the programming space and was getting a lot of volume. Looking back on it now, it probably wasn't super inappropriate, but it was never explained properly, right? So it would be like lots of these workouts, like 12-minute AMRAP, or 5 rounds of this with 3-minute rest in between, and the intensity at which to perform the exercise was never really articulated to me. And so I was giving maximal intensity every day because it's CrossFit, right? Like, you go into a CrossFit gym and the expectation is you're laying on the floor, gasping for air, trying to, get yourself off the ground before you leave the gym. And if you don't leave feeling like shit, then you really didn't work out. And And so I think that what you saw, and not to knock Rich Froning at all, it's not Rich's fault, but at the same time, like the videos that were coming out and the big talk in the industry was, oh, Rich Froning trains 6 and 7 times a day. And so the mindset was like, I need to train a lot, I need to train heavy, I need to train intense, and I need to do as much as I possibly can of it. And so I was doing that to its fullest with, the application of a coach. And I just wasn't recovering. And actually what I found was I became a worse athlete over the course of a year of programming because the application of the programming was so shit and my ability to recover was so shit.
Was there a moment that you sort of realized that you were going down, a negative trajectory in your training?
So it was all designed to peak around the Open. The final 3 months before the training, I had no desire, or before the Open, I had no desire to train. I would actually go into workouts and actually leave the gym. Like I would go to do and then I'd push press and my shoulders would be so beaten down to where I hadn't even slept the night before because they were aching so bad. And I would go in, fully caffeinated, trying to lock out. And I mean, my lifts were getting weaker, my joints were hurting worse, and I just didn't have the mental capacity to even finish it or the drive to want to finish it. What I now look back on and realize I was becoming nervous system adapted, but, it was, that was really the defining moment. And then I started to notice as I got closer and closer, and even right, the week before the Open, I was just getting injured. And so the week before the Open, I actually partially tore my biceps tendon, and the second week of the Open, I tore my labrum. And that was the last straw, and that was really the last athletic pursuit in the sport of fitness that I ever had.
Sure. So, that kind of a downward spiral, I personally experienced something similar. Fewer injuries, but definitely, starting to realize that I was just not able to do what I used to be able to do in the gym. I was feeling tired all the time, having a hard time focusing. I would do workouts that I had done previously and perform extremely terribly relative to my past performance, all that kind of stuff, and just start to add up. And you're like, oh, something has clearly gone wrong for me.
Yep. Yeah, and it's like in your head, you're like, man, I must not be training hard enough, or I must need to do more. And probably everyone listening to this has probably experienced to some degree. They're like, well, I'm tired. I just need to drag myself up, or get an extra shot of espresso, or have a pre-workout. And it's amazing now, here I am 3 years later, and I look back on it and I'm like, shit, dude, if I had only had somebody like myself around to give me the right advice, to take a step back, to understand that rest days are okay, and sometimes, taking 4 days off will move you forward in the long run. I just don't think that a lot of the ideas that you and I are talking about now publicly, they were around, but they weren't ready to be accepted. And I think that as a whole, the CrossFit population is starting to understand it better, and that's kind of cool to see. I'm glad to see that education is making its way out.
So for you, you also had background in some fitness modeling.
Yep.
I know you were a high-level golfer, and I think that there's this ability for certain types of people to kind of disconnect from the signals that they're getting from their body and keep pushing.
Yep.
Right, which is at some level a positive trait, because if you just quit as soon as anything gets hard, then you're not going to get anywhere. But that it becomes maladaptive when you just kind of turn off these, screaming signals from your body that something is going wrong. What's your relationship to that kind of feedback within yourself?
It's really interesting. So I touched on briefly that I was anorexic, and I've told people, and I would never, I pray that nobody hears this and takes it out of context, but I tell everyone, anorexia is the best and worst thing to ever happen to me. And I was not an overly disciplined kid growing up. I was not, I was naturally intelligent, really good SAT scores, good testing scores in school, but I never did my homework. I was lazy. And I was the only thing I cared about in high school was I knew I had some skill in golf, and I was ready to work really hard to be a pro golfer, because being a pro athlete was my whole thing. And when that stopped, I was this big downward spiral, but then anorexia almost brought about this level of commitment that I had never had to anything in my life. And anyone that's been through an eating issue or a body image issue knows the extremes that you're willing to go to hold yourself accountable to these regimens. And so, I say that because it taught me discipline that I've carried into other areas of my life. I mean, I talk about now getting up at 4:45 or 5 a.m. some days, and listen, I don't like getting up early any more than the next person likes getting up early, but I also know that it's necessary for me to complete the amount of work that I need to get done in a day. there's times where I don't want to back squat, and I know that to work at the percentage that I need to create adaptation, I need to suck it up and do it. And the problem is I know how to push through some really shitty things in my life. And so it's become a gift and a curse because, I shouldn't always be pushing through. So understanding that line can be very difficult.
So as a coach then, if you're working with someone on their nutrition, right? So say that you have an athlete who you're working with and you're prescribing them, their macros that they're eating and keeping track of how they're feeling and all that kind of stuff. How do you keep track of how that client is actually, responding? Like,
sorry,
no, that's
my
okay.
dog is going crazy, by the way.
Yeah, we got,
he must see something outside.
Yeah, there's definitely an intruder approaching.
I actually keep track of that for a client. So it's funny that you ask. I mean, the reality is what it goes back to is the fundamental understanding of being a coach, right? And this is where I really feel like I've learned to separate myself from others in the industry. And really like the crux of my business is I don't call it being a nutritionist. I don't call it prescribing macros. I call it being a nutrition coach. And you really can't have a coaching relationship unless you get to know the individual, unless you understand the individual, unless you understand what makes them tick. If I have a client that I know will naturally overtrain themselves, then I have to be cognizant of that. I need to be asking a lot of questions around not overtraining because we know that they're inclined to say, nah, man, I feel good. But maybe I need to ask questions that can get me to that conclusion. And I think that's really the fundamental piece of coaching. I would say that large part, you probably have some feelings around that as well in terms of understanding your clients and getting them to do the work that you're prescribing appropriately, right? With the appropriate intensity. So, I think that the word coaching sums it all up, but, appropriate coaching is massively important.
And I think that one thing that's hard to get across to clients, and I experience this as well, is again, if they haven't had the experience of sort of crossing the line and pushing them too far, that they don't necessarily understand what you're saying when you're like, hey, like, maybe you don't need to do more, maybe you need to do less. Do you have any examples or experiences actually communicating that to someone effectively who hasn't been there already themselves?
Yeah, I mean, the unfortunate part is a lot of times when they're willing to listen to you and when they're willing to quote unquote give in is when it's already too late, right? And I think that for the longest time, people didn't really understand that line even existed, right? They think that line is some mythical thing that, only pussies talked about because they just didn't have the balls to push really hard. And then all of a sudden they get to the state that you and I have both been to and they're like, oh wait, it's a real thing. And some people are so far into adaptation or, metabolic adaptation or nervous system adaptation that the fix is a very long process. So yeah, I have people that have listened. The most extreme example I can give is I had a woman that came to me, she's in her late 60s, and she was so metabolically adapted, so overtrained that it took us.
And what do you mean by metabolically
months.
Adapted? Can you give like a quick summary of that for folks?
Sure. So a lot of people out there are hearing like metabolic damage thrown around. Metabolic adaptation is probably the more scientific word for that. And so metabolic adaptation is basically you live in a very low calorie intake or even excessive caloric output, which is creating an excessive calorie deficit. And your body actually learns to live there and creates a homeostatic balance there. So, to illustrate an example, it would be somebody intaking 1,000 calories and they stay there for a very long time and they're doing so in the pursuit of fat loss. But now all of a sudden the body's like, shit, if this is all I'm going to get, I need to learn to live with only 1,000 calories. So what does it do? It slows down its metabolic output because it knows it can't burn through those 1,000 calories too quickly. It also reduces its ability to output, meaning it's not going to allow you to work as hard because you can't burn as many calories. So body temperature goes down, metabolic rate goes down, and body fat storage increases. So it's that's pretty much metabolic adaptation in a nutshell.
Sure. And does that have anything to do? Do you have any idea if that has anything to do with leptin signaling?
So there is. It's really funny. I was reading research yesterday. So there's definitely I would actually say a downregulation in leptin is what's sending the signal to the brain to downregulate thyroid. We're also seeing that downregulation in thyroid, which can then increase TSH, right, thyroid stimulating hormone, which is the most often misread number in blood work. But an increase in thyroid stimulating hormone can also re-signal to the brain to decrease leptin. So it is inverse, but they're not like, they're definitely related, but the degree of causation I'm not fully aware of. Some obese clients, you start to see like insulin resistance and also leptin resistance as well. That's starting to pop up quite a bit. And unfortunately, what I'm starting to see medically diagnosed is like leptin resistance in people that have overtrained or over dieted. Most recently, I worked with a former physique competitor that had done a couple of bikini shows and then wanted to have something to commit to. So our coach was like, well, hey, just do a powerlifting meet. And you'll have to make weight. So that means you'll have to stay in a calorie deficit, which is, you got somebody coming out of a really long-term diet. You've got them now doing something that's extremely central nervous system intensive. And you're asking them to stay in a deficit to make weight. That's a recipe for, be it metabolic adaptation, nervous system adaptation, and leptin resistance. It's just it was a shit show. And getting her to respond, the first thing we fixed was actually leptin levels in her body. We actually had that tested via blood work. But that's you're starting to see it in every industry, and honestly, it's the crux of everything I hate, to be completely honest.
Sure. So I interrupted you to talk about confusing hormonal stuff. You were talking about a 6-year-old woman who was metabolically adapted.
Yeah. So the most extreme case of somebody I've worked with is like she's in her late 60s. She was so metabolically adapted, it took us about 20 months to really fix her, so to speak. And then people are going to say, well, what does fixing her mean? Just getting all of her biofeedback measures, her hunger, her energy, her strength in the gym, her ability to sleep, and even getting her calories to close to a maintenance level without her gaining extreme amounts of weight. It took us about 20 to 22 months of working together to get her to that. And then it took us subsequently about a year for us to ultimately get her to her long-time body weight goal. So if you do the math on that, we're talking, 2 years and 10 months. That's an extreme amount of time for somebody that came to me only wanting to lose about 10 pounds. But that's the extreme nature of what some of these crazy low calorie diets and high output protocols are causing.
Sure. So in a lot of situations, you can get results short term doing something like not eating any food and training your ass off in the gym, but depending on your level of resilience, that may not actually get you what you want long term, right? That you can sort of you can strip the screw, so to speak, on being able to do that.
Yeah, and it's the best example I can give is UFC fighters. So this past year was the first time I got to work with somebody in the UFC, and we did a weight cut for him, and UFC fighters weigh in Friday morning at 9:30 for a Saturday night fight. And we weighed in, on Monday night, he was a 135, was his weight class, and Monday night he weighed 156. So that's 21 pounds that we had to cut in 4.5 days. And he made weight on the number 135 Friday morning, woke up on weight. It was actually a relatively easy cut. And that's all well and good. People are like, holy shit, 21 pounds in 4.5 days, that's a lot of weight. Yes, it absolutely is. The crazier part is he weighed in 9 a.m. on the number 135. By 2 p.m., he was back up to 157. Yeah. And that's you can cut any amount of weight in an extreme amount of time, but you're probably going to regain the same amount, if not more. And, I can tell you that same fighter is getting ready to fight in September. We are 6 weeks out of this fight, and it's, or at this point we're only, 3 or 4 weeks, but when we started, we were 6 weeks out, and we were already only, I think, 12 to 14 pounds overweight. So it's going to be a much easier cut this time, but we also have more time to work together.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, in any weight class sport like that, people do insane cuts. I mean, you hear people doing much more than 21 pounds, right? Like that's like, that's like, okay, yeah, that's easy for some of those guys, but that's,
you hear some of them like hold it as a trophy. Like, oh, I did it in a day. And the interesting research to me that's coming out is not the rate at which your body can rehydrate, but the rate at which your brain can rehydrate. And so you talk about all these, like all the brain damage that's happening fighting. Well, I think it's largely because they're fighting with a brain that's not fully rehydrated. So then they're getting concussed in the ring, and their brain was already mildly dehydrated. It's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, sure. You're just stacking problems on top of each other in that situation.
Yeah, it's scary.
So I think one of the things that's really interesting and challenging in working with clients, and we've been talking about a lot of folks who are very type A, highly motivated, want to push themselves, which I think that, if you're having people come to you to pay you to coach them in something like CrossFit or MMA, that you're going to attract that type of person, that you're probably not going to get the person who's lazy and unmotivated and doesn't want to work. But we talked about a lot of similar traits we see in these folks, and one of the things that I find interesting and challenging is a lot of my clients have a very tactical mindset, right? That they hear something like, oh, this fighter cut 21 pounds in a few days, right? This client was able to PR their snatch by 15 pounds in this 4-week cycle. That this person posted this video on Instagram of this crazy accessory exercise with tempo, and they're holding the kettlebell upside down, and they have a resistance band on it. That they see these things and they think that they're somehow a secret, right? It's a very tactical mindset. But as a coach, I think that you're trying to get people to see things strategically and see the big picture of, there may be application for specific tactics, but that we need to think about what's the highest leverage activity for you. And I know I personally struggle with this with clients and explaining this to them. How do you handle this with nutrition, where you get things like, oh, well, I saw this person's on the keto diet. I saw this supplement. I saw this person's macros they posted on Instagram. What do you do to balance people out with that?
Yeah, I mean, that's honestly the hardest thing that we as coaches fight is the internet coaches, right? And it's really funny. I always think back whenever that comes out to like Noah Olson. And when I first saw Noah at Training Think Tank, I was like, oh, you're tired of being coached by Instagram. Because every time I looked around, he was doing a workout that somebody else on Instagram had done. Right? And he was literally the epitome of being coached by the internet. Because he would wake up, he'd look through Instagram, and he'd be like, oh, I'm going to do that. And, then if Jacob Heppner did 10 workouts, Noah's going to do 11. And, like that was the mentality. And obviously he structured his training this year with Mac Training Think Tank, and he got 5th at the games. Like, I would say that's a pretty big improvement. Yeah. So, when looking at creating more compliance, obviously the education is first. And I've kind of coined the phrase with a lot of coaches and clients lately that education drives compliance. And I firmly believe in that. I think that if you can really get a client to get on board with what you're trying to do, and more importantly, why you're trying to do it, and educate them about things that they can be looking for in terms of the response, I think they're more apt to remain compliant. I think if they're kind of just taking shots in the dark and they really don't know why they're doing it, then they're going to go to Instagram and they're going to see that so-and-so PR their snatch or has abs or blah, blah, blah. And they're going to be like, well, I don't really know why the hell I'm doing this, so why not just switch and try this because it looks like it works. So, I always have a plan with the client. Listening to their body is the main plan, but I always have some sort of long-term outline that I like to work on with them. And, I educate them about that from day one. I also educate them about any potential pitfalls that they might, hit, and any roadblocks that they may hit along the way, because as progress is not linear. Stumbling is inevitable. And so you gotta educate your clients that that's okay too, and you gotta set the expectation that you're not judging them, you're there to support them. I think that's a really big piece that a lot of coaches overlook.
Sure. So you mentioned education, and I mean, I think that's that's something that can mean a lot of things to people, right? So we spent a while earlier today talking about leptin resistance, insulin resistance, and some more complicated hormonal aspects of training, all that kind of stuff. And I don't think that's what you mean by educating your clients about what you're doing, right? Because for them, they don't necessarily need to know that, and they don't want to know that. How do you educate them on what their protocol looks like?
Yeah. So I mean, like, a lot of times, I think that most people will come to me, and this is 100% on the dieting side, but people will come to me, well, I'm already eating at a deficit. Why am I not losing fat? Right? And then they'll get their prescription from me, and it's typically more food. Well, why did you give me more food? And that's my opportunity to tell them, I may not go into the leptin resistance and insulin resistance and anything like that, but I might go into it and say, hey, listen, like, this is, you're metabolically adapted, or you're on your way to metabolic adaptation. And let me explain to you what metabolic adaptation is, because it's a pretty serious long-term issue. And if we get you there, like, we're in for a long-term fix. And sometimes I'll use the example of the client I worked with for, 2.5 years to lose 10 pounds and say, this is a really extreme example of what that metabolic adaptation looks like. So I really need you to not let yourself go to this place. So it's more education from like a 30,000 foot view than it is like a tactical level, but creating enough for them to understand why we're doing what we're doing. And listen, some people come to me and they're very educated and they want that science level talk. I mean, I'm sure every now and then you get, the odd client that's like, hey, like, I love this energy system work, and they want to know like every single reason that you made that. And that's always fun to talk shop. But in general, education is just simply revolving around, the 30,000 foot kind of view.
Sure. And how much rope do you give clients to hang themselves with, so to speak? I know that as you probably experienced, right? You get people coming to you with stuff and you're like, hey, can I try this? And you may not think it's a good idea, but I also don't necessarily like telling people what they can and can't do. So
Yep.
It's kind of a tough decision. I'm like, well, do I let you just try this random thing that you saw on Instagram and, you can let me know how it goes? Or, do I tell you to, no, like, don't do that. What's wrong with it?
It kind of depends on the relationship I have with that client, where I feel like they're at in their progression, and, where we're working relationship. Obviously, I'm not going to take some client that's like in-season CrossFitter that I've just prescribed, more carbohydrates because I know they need the fuel and recovery, and, they're hearing things about keto and they want to try keto. I'm not going to allow that. But if I get a client that's like, hey, I heard cheat meals can really jumpstart the metabolism, and, I really want to go on a date on Friday night, like I really want a cheat meal, and I might be like, hey, cool, like do it, and while it may not have been 100% what I would have prescribed, I'm also going to use that as a time that I can look at data and what's happening internally of that person's body. So I use it as a learning experience for myself as well. So I try to give people as much flexibility as possible. I generally believe that, the best diet is going to be the one that's easiest to comply to. That being said, obviously there needs to be enough proper framework to create success.
Sure, because you hear of coaches, firing clients and all that kind of stuff, which,
fuck that.
Well, there you go. I guess that's your take on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't fire clients, man. I mean, the only way I'm going to fire a client is if you blatantly disregard every single thing I say. And then at that point, I just feel bad taking your money because you're not using it. Like, that's just an ethical decision that I have to make myself, and I'm not comfortable with it. So, but I would never fire a client for quote unquote messing up. If anything, I'm going to try to teach you, why did you make the decision to deviate, and what's going to happen if you continue deviating like that in the future, and potentially, like, what does this say about your lifestyle? Like, is this something we need to account for? Because I think every situation is a learning process as well.
Sure. So do you see, how much, I guess, deviation or lack of compliance do you see? Because, it's kind of interesting where if you're in a space where people are paying you significant amounts of money to meet with you or be coached by you, then, you anticipate better compliance than you might get from like a standard
Sure.
everyday person. But how much of an issue is that for you, would you say?
It varies. It varies on time of year. It varies on how the client came to me. But I would say it's not a massive issue with me, to be completely honest. And I would say any client that is non-compliant for any extended period of time, and by that I mean maybe 4 to 6 weeks, they usually excuse themselves from the program. So I would say any client that chooses to work with me and decides to work with me for a while, they're pretty compliant. And again, I think it goes back to what you're saying. If you're making the decision to pay someone to hold you accountable, you're not going to waste your time or money.
Sure. And I think that also for, anyone who's a decently experienced coach, you probably have a better understanding of where people are at, because I think a lot of people end up being non-compliant with a new fitness program or a new diet or something, because effectively they're trying to start too far ahead of where they are, right? That they want to start.
Completely agree.
Yeah, they want to start somewhere in the middle, and they're not even at the beginning yet. And, a good coach is going to be like, all right, listen, like, you're not going to do, double sessions in the gym and count all your macros when you don't know the difference between whether oatmeal is a protein or a carb and haven't actually trained other than being on the elliptical. Like, you're way too far ahead of yourself.
Completely agreed. Yeah. And I mean, I think that a lot of, people are like, oh, well, isn't there computer programs that can do what you do? And it's like, well, you just gave the perfect example of course not, and obviously we could go into millions of examples as to why not. But if I get somebody that comes to me, like you said, that doesn't know if oatmeal is a protein or carb, and they don't even know what a macro is, or even a calorie, for that matter, I'm going to not start them on a macro prescription. I'm going to work them more into a lifestyle prescription. And I think that there's a big misconception as to what we do, that's purely only macros. It's so much deeper than just the numbers. It's a lot into the reason a person makes certain choices and choices they make, and then obviously, at its highest level, yes, it is a numerical thing. But there's a lot of underlying issues that also need to be solved as well.
Sure. So if we're talking about these sort of high level performance based athletes, most
Sure.
of them are having an individualized programming prescription written for them in the gym. It takes into account their strengths and weaknesses, and they'll spend hours in there working out. They track their food, probably have someone paying attention to all the things they're eating. But like you said, that's not necessarily appropriate for, or even desirable for everyone. So what do you do with someone who, let's say is a decent level athlete, competitive within their own gym, has no aspirations of making it to regionals or anything like that, and kind of has mixed goals of wanting to get better at performance and change their body composition a little bit, but doesn't necessarily want to commit to tracking all their food? What would you say to that person?
Sure. I would first try to get a level of understanding as to where, what their knowledge is relative to what they're currently consuming and what their diet looks like, right? And if they're exhibiting zero knowledge as to what their intake is, then I'm going to try to convince them to track for a little bit, but as an educational tool, right? And so a long time ago, Eric Helms posted a really good infographic on Instagram, and I just pulled it up as you were saying that. And it basically says how to start flexible dieting. And it shows a guy starting on the left, and it says learn to swim, step 1, shallow end, step 2, deep end, step 3, and then it explains step 1 is awareness, dietary awareness, education, habit, behavior, food journal, right? And so you're going to kind of start somebody there. Step 2 would be a rigid dietary restraint. So now you're going to match foods to macros, and you're going to self-create a meal plan. Step 3 is, purely flexible dieting, and then step 4 is to adapt within the framework of the success you've created from flexible dieting. And so that's really the progression that would take somebody through, in their eating kind of plan relative to their goals. Do I think that you have to track forever? No, I don't always track. I openly say that. But is it a phenomenal learning tool? Absolutely. So that's kind of where we would go with it.
Sure. Yeah. So I think for a lot of people, they want the results, but they don't necessarily want to make the lifestyle commitment to actually tracking all the time, and that they're okay with that trade-off.
Yep.
And a good coach is able to work with them on something like that.
Sure, man. It's, you have to be able to work with clients and what their lifestyle expectations are. If I'm saying to you, the only way I can help you is macros, and you're saying I don't want to count a single macro in my life, then we're not a good fit. And so if you're cool as a macro coach and that's the only way you want to live and you want to turn away clients like that, great. I'm not comfortable turning away people that need my help. And so if I can find a way to help them, I'm going to do that. Now, I'm not saying everyone that comes to me that I can help them. I'm not Superman. I definitely can't. But I'm educated enough to understand that there's a large continuum of dietary protocols that can and will work.
Sure. So let's shift gears a little bit and start to talk more about the business that you've built with coaching, right? Because it's not just
Sure.
you anymore. You have a bunch of folks working with you, quite a few clients in the system with you guys, and then you also have the certification you just launched. So walk me through what that's looked like for you. I mean, coming into the sort of CrossFit, functional fitness industry as an outsider with a background in kind of a different, sphere as far as supplements and fitness modeling and all that kind of stuff. What does that trajectory look like, and how have you sort of built yourself into, not just a one-man show?
Yeah, so ironically, I had a call with somebody today that wanted to discuss the same topic. And for anyone that doesn't know, I mean, I've said it on several podcasts out there. If you reach out to me and you want to get on the phone and you want some of my time and I can help you in any way, I'm absolutely going to make that time for you, and we can definitely get on a call. So this wasn't a paid call. This is just a dude that wanted some advice on growing his business and getting into the space. And so one of the first things he started asking me was I want to make sure I have the infrastructure right from day one. And when I scale, I'm going to hire this person and that person. And I kind of stopped him, and I hope it didn't come off douchey, and I don't think it did, but I was like, listen, man, you haven't demonstrated you can help one person yet. This is all hypothetical. And so what you need to do is you need to stop the discussion about scaling, and you need to stop the tactical bullshit, and you need to get in the trenches, and you need to help one person. And after you help that one person, you need to help another person and another person. And until you're like so to the point to where you don't know if you have enough time to help other people, then you can start thinking about scaling it. Right. And so for me, it was very simple. I mean, I left a corporate job that I was not happy with. It sent me into a pretty bad place financially. I mean, I was overdrawn on my bank account at one point and couldn't even buy a cup of coffee. But I knew I was living and doing exactly what I wanted to do. I knew I had something that the world needed, and I trusted in it. And I just delivered value to individuals day in and day out. It got to the point where one time I looked at my client list and I had 160 plus clients. And, for somebody that gets on the phone with each and every one of their clients, I was on the phone nonstop. I had zero life balance, and it was a really rough go. So that's when I knew it was time to scale. That's when I knew I had to create some education systems. And so first what I did was I built a mentorship program. I mentored 10 people. Out of those people, I actually selected a couple that I thought would be a great fit to work in the business. And so we brought them in and they started working for me. It was around that time that I hired my first personal assistant. She has since become the president of my business, and she also does the sales. And so now when a lead comes in, she communicates with them, she puts them with the correct coach, and really, we have really good moving pieces, so we have good flow. She and I now share an assistant. We brought in someone extra for admin, and we've got a full-time media person, and then obviously we've got 10 coaches. So, that's the business in a nutshell. I mean, I can go into any piece more if you want, but that was kind of the
Sure.
really big overview.
Yeah, so I mean, basically, step one is to be really good at what you do. Step two
Sure.
is to get people to actually sign up for it, right? So, you got yourself to the point where you were just personally overwhelmed with the amount of work you had, and then based upon that, you figured out how to grow the business. So what, I mean, I think for a lot of people, who are potentially interested in something like this, whether they're a coach at a gym or they're doing some nutrition coaching or writing some programming for people, maybe they have a few people who they work with, but they're struggling to get more, right? And it seems like it's, I can remember this too, where it seems like a weird insurmountable hurdle where you're like, how does this guy over here have 160 clients who he can't even keep track of, and I can only get 2? What did you do to get those 160 clients?
I think that I've always had the philosophy of wanting to help every person I come in contact with. And so I think instead of, and it's a really small mental shift, but it's an effective one, instead of looking at the world as to how can I get more clients, I looked at the world as how can I help more people. And I wasn't trying to monetize how can I help more people, right? And so when I say that, that means when I get on Facebook in the morning, instead of browsing around looking at what everyone's fucking off and doing, I'm getting on Facebook and thinking, wow, this person asked a diet question. Let me go on and answer it. Let me make a post today about something that, I used dietarily yesterday. I ran into so-and-so at the store. Let me help them with something. And it literally was like that attitude of just constantly making sure that I was helping people. It was just putting me in the right conversations. And then those conversations led to business. And obviously the more and more clients you get, the more and more referrals you're going to get if you're doing a good job. So that was obviously a big part towards the end. But, those first 70, 80 clients are critical and you have to be able to get there. And so, I guess if I had to put that into a tactical sense, it would be content creation. But I don't even like to use the tactic of content creation. I like to say, putting stuff into the world that's going to help people, because content creation for the sake of content creation is just, it's like masturbation. It's fun, but it's not going to get you anything.
Sure. Yeah, I think we see a lot of that where there's, a blog post that you can tell someone read an article that they need to write 2 blog posts a week. So they're just putting them out, and there's literally 0 actionable items or anything helpful in it. And you're like, that was just a real bad time for everyone. You probably hated writing that. I hated reading it. We're all worse off. Thank you.
Exactly. And so, again, it's just changing the attitude with which you do everything, man. Like from your encounters with individuals to, the stuff you write to how you carry yourself. It's all important.
Sure. So, you were able to, by, virtue of being very helpful and good at what you do and sort of putting it out there that like, hey, I'm here to help people and I want to actively engage, to start to gain some traction. Do you recall a sort of tipping point at which you're like, oh wow, all of a sudden I have more people than I can handle? Was there any specific thing that you did where that business changed for you?
To be completely honest, no. I did not in any way, wake up one morning and be like, wow, like that's really, I'm so overwhelmed. Obviously getting on podcasts has been a really big driver for me. And the reason I love podcasting so much, you really get to articulate knowledge the way you think it's meant to be heard. And, I tend to think I'm a pretty good writer. I don't have any formal writing training, but I can communicate well in the written word, but I still don't think you can communicate as well in the written word as you can audibly. And, or maybe I'm just not as good of a writer as I think I am, but, I think that people engage today more on podcasts, and so just being able to talk about the ways in which we help people, and obviously they've become the proper, tactics, and I hate that fucking word, but they become the proper, ways of helping people, and people have resonated with it. So there's no like one tipping point. I think that's actually the reason that we've had sustained success, is because we didn't go with one tactic that blew us up overnight. We did the right things repeated over time that actually got us to where we are today.
And then as you've expanded, I think that one of the things that's most challenging to anyone who's, a coach in a gym, or, a nutrition coach, or someone doing some sort of technical skill, right? Whether it's being a recording engineer, or, if you look at, sort of things that are more traditionally looked at in that sort of mentorship model of like blacksmith or whatever, how do you actually get someone under you to be able to not necessarily perform in the exact same way or at the same level as you, but to be able to actually keep the standard that you've set for the kind of service that you're providing?
Yeah, so that's actually where I kind of bucked the trend in that kind of space, where instead of going out and finding really high quality nutritionists, I went out and found really high quality people. And I found really good people, knowing that I could train virtually anyone on the skill set they needed. Does that mean that I could make them really good overnight? No, it does not. But does that mean I can make them serviceable, and that they can really hone their craft over a period of time? Absolutely. But if they're really quality individuals, they're going to want the education. They're going to want to reach out to me. They're going to want to collaborate on help for their client. And more importantly, they're going to want to go the extra mile. And so I've just found a collection of awesome individuals. I've helped them hone their craft. And that's really how we've done, that's how we've scaled the service appropriately. It was not on need. It was more on surrounding myself with an awesome group of individuals.
So if you, are bringing someone on, you said, hey, I want good people, what does that actually mean? Because I think everyone in any sort of business has some understanding that, like, yeah, hiring matters, you want good people, but that, that can mean any number of things, and the type of person you're probably looking for depends a lot on the business that you're in as well, and the role you're hiring
Sure.
for. How do you actually filter whether someone is quote unquote good or a right fit for you?
Yeah, so it's understanding like what are the, kind of like your KPIs, right? Like what moves the needle? What keeps a client working with you? What brings clients to your business? For us, it's level of service. It's, availability to your client. It's understanding of your client, ability to communicate with your client. So the quality of people that I look at or the qualities I look for in people are, can you effectively communicate? Do you have compassion? Do you have empathy? Are you accessible? Can your client text you? Will you respond quickly? Do you genuinely give a shit about your clients? And those are the pieces that, I really look for in individuals, because again, like maybe you don't have Lyle McDonald's knowledge, and that's okay. We can teach you the knowledge necessary to be a great coach, but I can't teach you to be a really good individual. I can't teach you to care. That has to be self-directed.
Sure. So you're able to kind of, bring people on through a mentorship, and then observe these traits in them, and you're kind of filing it in the back of your head. Is that kind of the process you go through with folks?
Exactly, dude. Yeah, that's almost exactly it.
Yeah, interesting. So you mentioned earlier that you really value coaching and hire people to coach you, and that you've been working with Bedros as a business coach. What are the biggest things that he sort of illuminated for you that have been surprising to you about your own business from working with him?
The one thing that I think Bedros is really good at is instilling self-belief in everybody. It's so many people get into business thinking they want something, but not genuinely believing they can achieve it, or that they should achieve it, or that they're even deserving of achieving it. And so Bedros is really good at that. he's also helped me create a lot of like clarity in what I'm after. You know, I think people say, well, I want success, or I want this much money, or I want, this in my business. And he's really good at breaking down the steps to get there. And then, that could be like, I need this number of clients at this amount of money. Okay, great. That's too high level. It's more like, I need this number of clients this week. Even that's too high level. It's, I need to schedule this many sales calls this week. Right. And so he's really good at breaking down the nuance of that. And then of course, I think I would be remiss to say that, Bedros, the network that he lives in and the network he can put you in is obviously, massively helpful. He's connected to me to some really high quality individuals that have been able to help as well.
Sure. So if if he's helping you drill down on what you actually want, like what does he clarify for you?
So I knew, without going into like too many details, so it's really funny, and for somebody that has built a successful like scaled business, I'm still really uncomfortable talking about like money and like the creation of it, right? Because it's just not. It's really at the core of everything. It's not why I got into it. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's been very fruitful. It's allowed me to provide for my family, and I'm massively grateful for that. I mean, there's one thing that I wake up every day with a mission to do, and that's to provide for my family. For those people that don't know, I have a baby on the way, and like, I couldn't think of anything more exciting and, that I'm more passionate about than giving to my fiance and giving to our kids. He always reminds me of that, but I mean, in terms of, we know I launched certification and that was great. And, we sold way more than we ever anticipated. I mean, we sold 3 of them out, added spaces and sold those spots out. And so he's like, you need to do X amount of revenue next year for certifications. And he's like, this is how you're going to do it. And for him, he's very big on, you have a product that people will buy and that'll make you X amount of revenue, but people also need to buy you, the brand, and people need to put trust in you. So he's very big on building your own personal brand and how to do that. Obviously he helped me get a book deal with, Tucker Max. And so I have a book coming out next year. So those are kinds of some of the clarity pieces he's built up. I mean, obviously I knew I needed more people to follow him. Well, how do we do that? Well, we build your brand. Okay, here's the steps to do it. You want your revenue to 5x next year. Okay, great. Here's the 4 revenue streams that each need to make X amount of dollars to get you there. And so, it's actually putting things into business perspective, because if it was left to me, I would wake up every day like an idiot and just grind and help as many fucking people as possible and try to make us, ultimately be making as much money as possible. But, at some point, as that does burn you out. And if I'm burnt out at all, I'm not servicing my clients properly. So just creating a lot of clarity around those systems.
Sure, yeah. So I think that, you mentioned that your tendency would be just to grind and push yourself, right? We talked about that in the physical sense as well in the gym. And I know that you're a big Gary V fanboy, right? In a lot of his messages. Hustle and,
yeah.
and get out there and push yourself and all that kind of stuff. But, at this stage, it's not enough to do that. So, I mean, how do you reconcile that tendency to hustle and grind and sort of that, entrepreneurial, I don't know what the right word is for it, inspirational fodder with actually growing the business and doing the right stuff? How do you balance that?
I think it's a targeted hustle and a targeted grind. I think far too many people think that hustle and it's, hustle has been sexed up in the media and said it's, hustle means you're not sleeping, you're not doing that. And so, I mean, I did the classic hustle, I'm going to wake up before you, I'm going to outwork you. And, really, my thoughts of outworking somebody, just, working more than them, it just left me more fatigued than them. I mean, truthfully, that was it. The examples I give, I listen to Eric Thomas up at 3:30 in the morning, and all I'm doing is staring at the fucking clock, wishing I was still sleeping, and staying up late at night. And really all that happened, the truth was, back then, when I was quote unquote hustling, I didn't even have a reason to be up at those times. I was thinking I was working, and all I was doing was just, wandering through my day, trying to think of ways to do things. And, most recently I actually went to one of Craig Ballantyne's events, and he calls it his Perfect Life Workshop. And it was more around structuring your day. And I can tell anybody that the real key to success as an entrepreneur that has several things on their plate is finding ways to structure your day. And so now I like to say I have 3 work days. I have, from 5 a.m. until about 9:30 or 10 when I take my first call. That's my work day. That's when everything that moves my business forward, that's when it gets done. Then I've got from about 9 to 5. And that's when I work on client calls or when I do things like this, like podcast. And then I've got from 5 o'clock until bed, and that's my family work day. And that's when I work out, and that's when I spend time with my family. So dinner, getting the kids, talking to the kids about how school was, and getting them ready for bed, and all the things that, make up being a family man. And because I have those times set out in my day, I'm as routinized as I only check email once a day on my computer. From 7 to 9 p.m. If you have a email that needs any sort of lengthy response, you're not getting it until the evening. And, if it's something I can reply 5 words on and I happen to see it on my phone, great, I'll do it. But the reality is I don't stress myself out over email anymore because structure is what I needed.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, it's not just a matter of hustling and grinding and randomly running around all day and responding to emails and doing calls. Like, yeah, that can happen, but it's more about having the systems and structure in place to, do the stuff that matters long term that actually moves you forward.
Yeah, because servicing your clients is ultimately what's going to keep your clients around, but it's not going to make you any more money, right? If you're talking from a business standpoint, you need to be doing things that are going to get you more clients too, which is, again, if you go back to what I said, how do you get clients? You help more motherfuckers. So service your clients, yes, but also go out and help more people. And so if you're not finding time in your day to go out and help more people, you're not going to move your business. You're not going to grow your business.
Jason, this has been great, man. You've given us tons
super happy.
Tons of great stuff on nutrition, on getting people to listen to what you say and not do stupid shit they see online, on how to actually try to grow a business and get past those, inevitable stumbling blocks that everyone has when they're trying to add clients, trying to hire people, all that good stuff. So you've got several different things on your plate, as we discussed, and you prioritize them and work on them from 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. Let's talk about all the different options people have to participate in the things you're putting into this world. You can do nutrition coaching for them. There's seminars. You have supplements. You apparently have a book coming out. Give us the rundown.
Yeah, so lots of fun things always happening in my life. It's always crazy. The one place to always get to me is jasonphillipsnutrition.com. And that's where, obviously all my blog posts go up. My speaking schedule's getting ready to go up. It's kind of becoming seminar season, so I have a very busy speaking schedule, at the end of this year. I'm trying to get it in before the baby comes. That's, obviously you can sign up for our email list there. That's where we put out information regarding the certification. Until next month, we've never actually publicly, put the certification signups out there. It's always been a private thing, but we will be putting out a public page for that next month. So if you're interested, get on the email list or just send us a message. There's a contact form on there. If people want to get to me, fill it out, send it to me. I do read my own emails, so that will get to me. And other than that, man, people can find me on Instagram, Jason Phillips Fitness, or we have a new account, Driven Life Nutrition, or on I'm sorry, that was Instagram. And, on Facebook, just find me at Jason Phillips and send me a message, dude. I love to interact with anybody that I can help and that I can add value to. I'm always humbled to be where I am. I'm only where I am because other people have put faith in me. So I want to return the favor. I want to, help you and I want to help whoever I can get to wherever they want to be.
There we go. All kinds of options to be coached either on how to coach or to be told what to eat and all that kind of stuff. So,
yeah, man.
That's good stuff, man. When's the book coming out? What's the deal with that?
So, talked to my publisher yesterday. We're looking for a tentative March launch date next year. So I'm knowing what I know about publishing, I'm going to go ahead and say April of 2018.
What's it called and what's it about?
So tentative title is Create Yourself, Create Your Success, and yourself being 2 words. Being that the theme of the book is I do teach you my nutritional strategies, but I also teach you how to kind of use them to frame who you are. And oftentimes what we find is, nutrition and success with nutrition is a gateway into a better version of yourself, which often translates into more success in other areas of life. So I do teach you to master yourself, your nutrition. I do teach you to master yourself and, ultimately create the success that you've been looking for.
What if I'm not looking for success? Is this book for me?
If you're not looking for success, I'm probably the wrong person to follow.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, I
don't want to move you backwards, brother. That's just not my jam. You would be a good client that gets fired, dude. One of the rare exceptions.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I mean, I was mostly looking for, depression and misanthropy. So I guess I should probably not read your book when it comes out.
Maybe find some good drugs. Go through withdrawals. That might help.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that sounds like a pretty reasonable plan.
Hey, this is Todd again, and as most of you know, I consume, read, listen to, watch an absurd amount of content on a regular basis, and a few times per month I send out my thoughts on some of the most interesting or insightful stuff that I've taken a look at. You can be on the list to receive this fascinating, captivating, and delightful information at toddneef.com. That's I before E. Head over there, go ahead and type your email address in, and then as I send these things out, again, a few times a month, you'll get it and you'll be inundated with a carefully curated list of the best stuff that I am experiencing.